Hey guys, good morning. So we took a break from painting our river diorama and we're gonna be making some different ground covers today. I saw a YouTube video that you could make that foam grassy ground cover that then you can make into bushes and shrubs and trees. Those packages tend to range from $6 to $8 and that's for only one color. So today I'm gonna show you how to do it for really cheap. We're gonna be using basic sponges. I've got parchment paper because this is what I'm gonna use to dry my stuff on. We've got our blender. I am using my kitchen blender. A lot of people go out and buy a new blender because they're gonna destroy it, but I'm gonna do things a little bit differently. So this is just my cheap kitchen blender. And I've got various colors of green. And then you just need a bowl, some gloves, and water. So let's get to it. You'll see that a lot of the videos on YouTube tell you to add the paint into the blender before you squeeze out all the water. I didn't want to do that because that would destroy my blender. So I left my foam slightly damp, and now this is when I'm gonna start adding the paints. I've got a couple of tips for you guys. Number one is that you can use any type of sponge. I used grout sponges and I used sponges that you use to wash your car. They worked perfectly. Number two is that I used my blender, and to make it a little bit quicker, I actually ended up using my Ninja as well. Just keep in mind that if you're having a hard time cutting it up and it's not chopping, just reduce the amount of sponge that you put into the Ninja and increase the water. The other thing is that you can use any type of paint. Acrylic paints, the cheap ones that you could pick up at Michael's and Walmart, work out perfect for this. Some people use specialty dyes and you really don't need to do that. The last step in this process is to lay all of your foam onto a piece of parchment paper and then put that onto a baking sheet. I put this in the oven at 250 degrees for about 30 to 40 minutes so that it would dry completely. After that, you are ready to use it. This is what we ended up with once we sifted out and separated our two piles of dirt. We ended up with a coarse section, and then we ended up with this really fine ground cover. I did go ahead and I added a tiny bit of my gray grout into here. I'm okay with it. I think it's gonna be fine for what we need. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these into plastic bags. And I think I'm actually going to, try to, I'm not sure I really like the white fertilizer beads anymore now that they've been sifted into large chunks. So I'm gonna get rid of this. We're getting ready to make up some leaf ground cover. It's really simple. Grab some leaves from the garden that are nice and dry. I've got a plastic bag to put all of this stuff into. We're gonna be using our blender, and that's pretty much it. You're just gonna kind of ground all this up. I'm gonna ground it up with some of the finer twigs that are attached, and we're gonna see what that looks like. as you can see, today is the day that we are attempting to make all of our ground cover for our diorama. I took some of the Sculptamold and I laid it onto parchment paper and I let it dry overnight. This is just a thin layer, nothing special about it. And then while I had my unsanded grout out, I went ahead and I laid just a layer of it also on the parchment paper. The plan is to use a meat tenderizer to grind this up into smaller rocks and little pebbles. We're gonna be using an assorted mix of paints that are brown and gray. We're gonna definitely add some black wash to that. And this is gonna be made into gravel. So let's get started with that and see what we can come up with. We put our gravel and our rocks into the oven at 200 and we baked it for about 30 minutes and now everything is completely dry. I'm gonna be setting aside two different sections of this gravel because one of them I want for it to be a traditional gravel, and then the other I think I'm gonna reserve as like a thicker rock base for maybe the river and maybe some of the dirt road areas. So we're gonna color them in two different colors. So let's get started. We just made our ground cover, gravel ground cover. Now we're going to make a sandy, rocky ground cover out of these thicker pieces that I'm gonna be using on the riverbed. I think I'm also gonna layer this underneath the cabin and along the dirt driveway. So this is gonna be a little bit of a bigger batch, so I'm separating it into two sections, and we're gonna be using gray, tan, and this chocolate brown. And I think I may do a black wash over the entire thing again. I always like to kind of mix everything with my hands because I feel like you can work it a little bit better than with a spoon. So we're just gonna get to doing that and see what we come up with. It's been about a day or so since we started making all of the ground cover for our diorama. And I wanted to just let you know trouble that we came into. So originally I was using kitchen sponge, both in the high density and the more cellulose type. I moved on to car sponges and thought this was gonna be a great alternative to kitchen sponges because they come in bigger packs, larger quantity, and for cheaper money. The problem with this sponge is that it does not mix into the blender as well. For some odd reason, this sponge also does not tear easily. It takes quite a bit of pressure in order for you to be able to tear it into pieces, which is one of the reasons why it didn't mix in the blender well. So originally I was gonna scratch the entire project because I really was looking to make a little bit more of some ground cover. But then I thought to myself, this might make great clump foliage. We went ahead and we mixed up two batches of the fine stuff for ground cover, but this actually might work out very well if it's clumped together to make bushes. I can also make the trees, maybe like the inside of the trees so that it sticks a little bit better. So what I did is I went ahead and I got my Ninja. I wet this down quite significantly. I put more water than foam, cut these into very small pieces because even in the Ninja, I was having a really hard time getting this to chop. I did have to wait a little bit because my Ninja was overheating here and there. I squeezed out the excess water, but these are still pretty damp. I have a water bottle and some paint, and we're gonna be putting some regular white glue into this mixture so that we can actually create bigger clumps. And then we're gonna divide these into two sections because I'm gonna do two different colors. So let's get started. it's finally starting to come together, and today we're gonna go ahead and paint this section of the terrain. This area right here is underneath the house, and it's going to get our gravel mixture that we had made up earlier. So I'm gonna paint the base of that in a gray, maybe with a little bit of black wash, but you really don't have to put too much attention into it because it's gonna have gravel. We're gonna focus today on this section, which is gonna be a dirt road with a little grassy median kind of in the middle. This is gonna get a mixture of dirt and tan colored grout, and we're gonna just start to put this together. So let's get a base layer on. Now we're gonna go ahead and put the gravel on. In order to do that, I'm using Mod Podge Matte. I am using a wet brush to help spread the Mod Podge. We're gonna lay the gravel down, and then we're gonna cover it with some Scenic glue, which is 1 part Mod Podge, 3 parts water, and a couple of drops of dish soap in a spray bottle, and that's gonna set that. It's now time to start finishing the edge of our dirt road, and we're gonna work each of the details individually. So you'll see that I put some of the gravel from the driveway into this area, and now I'm working with a mixture of dirt and grout. It does have a little bit of a dusty color, but I kind of like that because that's how kind of dirt roads are. I'm working with standard white glue and a wet brush. So let's get started and see what we can make out of this. This driveway is going to be created out of several different ground covers. The first one is the dirt grout mix. The second one is the fine turf that we made out of the foam sponges. And then I am combining both gravel mixtures that we made, both the gray one and the brown one. And then I'm topping it off with the crushed leaves. This is going to give it a very authentic look. We're now ready to cover up the campsite driveway as well as the campsite area. So the driveway is going to be painted in a gray. We're not going to do any special finish because a lot of it is going to get covered up with these brown rocks that we made earlier, and we're going to sift in some of the dirt in between that. And then the camp area is going to be a mixture of grass and dirt and pine needles. So I think what we're going to do is we may be painting this, maybe we're going to paint it green as a base coat and go from there. Now that we've got a base color over both the parking area for the campground and the campground itself, we're gonna start laying the ground cover on the driveway first. Before we do that, you'll notice that originally I painted this in a really light tan, but then I decided to change my mind because I knew that this area was gonna be covered with pine needles, patches of grass, maybe even a little bit of dirt underneath the picnic table. I might also do some sandy areas, which is actually going to probably be a little bit of sawdust just to kind of lighten up the color a little bit. Most of the grass is going to be kind of on this berm area, but for the areas that weren't going to get grass, I wanted to make sure that there was a dark, dirty underneath. And all of this is going to be sprinkled with our dirt anyways, so we don't really have to worry about covering it perfectly to begin with. So let's get started covering up this area. We're gonna take the clump foliage that we had made out of that crappy sponge that I was hating. You see that your clump foliage should look exactly like that. It should be just a giant clump. We're gonna take some of that clump foliage and we're gonna add it to some of the stonework here in different areas. We are also going to take some of the gravel that we used on the driveway and we're gonna put some kind of here on the base. I also have leftover rocks and I think I'm gonna build up some of the waterfall down there and in that corner. I'm gonna be using hot glue to attach the clump foliage. Technically, you can use Mod Podge. However, I'm very impatient and I really don't wanna wait for it to dry. So let's get started. I've decided that before this area dries, I don't like the fact that there are no tire tracks in this. So I'm just going through and I'm removing with my finger, and we're gonna correct these little white areas. But I'm basically removing not all of the gravel, just some of it. And then we're gonna dry brush a highlight over this. Yeah. Because typically, even though the driveways and campgrounds are gravel, you will still see tire tracks. So I'm using my Jeep just to kind of measure out the tire spread. Now that we've cleared out the tire tracks, we're gonna use this gray beigey ivory color and we're gonna dry brush it right onto the area. I'm using a wet brush as always. And you gotta kind of work quickly. And we're just gonna stipple it right down the center. It gives it a really nice little dusty look. And I'm also okay if some of it gets on the side areas, because campgrounds tend to be pretty damn dusty. Okay, we're now gonna grab a little bit of gray and do the same thing. I wanna add back a tiny bit of texture into this area, so I'm taking my gravel that I made and I'm gonna pull from that really fine section. So we're just gonna kind of come back and we're just gonna add a tiny bit of texture. With our main elements in place, we're gonna go and now just apply some of that clump foliage to the different spots. This clump foliage, we're actually gonna be adding some detail to it, but not at this stage. So for now, it's just about getting it in there. And again, you wanna kind of pull it apart, kind of how it is clumped. You don't want to force section. So for instance, like that little area is already coming apart. So I'm just going to use that. And then I'm going to use that. And maybe that. Okay, let's get that put on. We're getting ready to work on the residential side of the river. As always, I've got my glass of water. That area down there, I want for that to be a little bit more grassy than this area here. I've got some gray. We've got that dusty ivory that we've been working with. Got a dark green and a regular grass green. And I've got raw umber, which is a very dark chocolate brown. Let's get started on this and see what we could come up with. This over here is our dirt road coming into the house. Actually more like our sandy road, because most of the roads I have seen are really a beautiful fine white sand. So we're gonna now take this very ground up. This is basically like grout. This is actually, the bottom of my bag had these tiny little pebbles, and we're actually gonna make all of this pretty sandy. So I've got my brush loaded up with some water and some paint. Sorry, I've got my brush loaded up actually with some water and Mod Podge. And we're just gonna brush all of this all over the sides, all over the dirt. That's gonna brush it onto the road. That's gonna give us a really nice kind of dusty appearance. And if I need any more, then I guess I could switch over to my grout. We're getting ready to seal up everything that we've put thus far onto the display. I still have more to go, but you can seal it in layers. We're gonna be sealing it with isopropyl alcohol straight out of the bottle, just the cheap stuff that you could get at the dollar store really. And then we mixed up a mixture of scenic glue. So I did 6 ounces of Mod Podge matte and 18 ounces of water, and I did about 4 drops of dish soap to kind of help things along. We're gonna go ahead and wet everything that we're sticking down, followed by Mod Podge. So I just got my order of static grass that I got on Amazon. I was really excited about picking these up. My other option were to have purchased a static grass hopper and then all the static grasses individually. These are small tufts and we're going to be using them all around our diorama. So I'm loving these. These are 5 millimeter in height. I'm not loving these so much. These are 3 millimeter, and when I say they are tiny, they are tiny. These are basically about the size of a pea, less than that. I mean, these are tiny, you can kind of see. So I wish that these were taller. I also noticed that the small ones are shedding a lot. See, this is also a 3 millimeter. I was originally going to return them to Amazon, but they only cost me 12 bucks for the 2 of these. And it's really honestly not worth it. I'm going to use them as fill-in grass throughout the diorama. So you're going to notice that I went ahead and I set all of my elements, like my trees and all of my structures, onto the diorama. And that's because I needed to know exactly where the grass would go. So I'm not going to show you the entire diorama, but you see here we've got several of our elements already in place. Obviously the super glue is not going in the water. We were even placing our cars so that we know exactly where things are going to be going. And now I'm going to work on putting grass everywhere. Hey guys, well, this is pretty much it. This is what all of our DIY ground cover looks like. From the gravel to the leaves, all of those elements of turf that we put. You're also getting a little preview of my trees. I'm going to be putting together a separate video on how to make those, so make sure you check back. You're not going to want to miss that because the trees are phenomenal and they're really easy to make. So I'm excited to put that out for you. If you guys have enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. Also leave me a comment below. I love to hear from you guys. And I want to know if you think that you can use some of these techniques to elevate your course. Be sure to check out the videos on the back end because I'm going to be linking some really awesome clips to the back end. And as always, thank you for stopping by and don't forget to subscribe.